As far as what would generally be considered relevant, ninth President William Henry Harrison didn't accomplish anything in his short 31-day presidency. This isn't said to criticize Harrison, as it would be hard for any president to have significant accomplishments in such a short span of time, especially in Harrison's day. At the time, presidents were generally expected to have a more subdued role in the overall government. Had Harrison done anything drastic in the 31 days before his death, he would have been an exception. Harrison's presidency was before the time of the 100-day benchmark which modern presidents are measured by. Today, it's a common expectation for a president to make a national impact almost immediately, with most recent presidents passing anywhere from 10 to 20 executive orders in their first 100 days. But even a modern president serving the length of Harrison's term would only get to serve out less than a third of the benchmark. Furthermore, a president's first month in office can hardly be indicative of what their whole presidency might look like, and how they perform in the long term versus the short term. This is why Harrison is almost always omitted from presidential rankings. Even those who study United States history generally agree that there simply wasn't enough information to tell what kind of president he was. While he didn't accomplish anything notable, he was still the President of the United States for 31 days. Most of that time was spent dealing with office seekers. At the time, new presidents were swarmed by people looking for jobs in the federal government. This didn't simply mean Harrison had a pile of applications that he had to attend to as part of his daily routine, or have a secretary deal with, but that the White House was packed with individuals trying to make sure they were noticed by the new president. This did very directly impact Harrison's short tenure. According to one account, the White House halls were so full on one occasion that Harrison had to leave through the window of one room and enter through the window of another just to get around. Another time, he'd been prevented from attending a cabinet meeting. Any president of the time would have had to deal with the problem of office seekers. President Polk in his diaries quite frequently and adamantly mentioned it as the worst part of being president. However, the fact that it was exceptionally bad for Harrison could be blamed on him. He was advised to put together his administration ahead of time, so it would mostly be in place before he took office, but he declined as he wanted to focus on festivities and being out among the public. It's possible he could have spent his time more productively, if not for all of the office seekers. As he once said, quote, "I am so much harassed by the multitude that calls upon me that I can give no proper attention to any business of my own." He also wasn't as decisive in regards to hiring office seekers as some of his advisors wanted him to be. His proposed agenda was that he wanted a merit-based system. He'd personally visited different departments to observe their activities and wanted to make sure the workers were committed to their work rather than partisan politics. In fact, he ordered that any federal workers caught electioneering be fired. This was very different from the patronage system of simply giving positions to party members. Harrison was confronted with this option as he was pressed to fire all Democrats who were already in such positions. Reportedly, he exclaimed, quote, "So help me God, I will resign my office before I can be guilty of such an iniquity." The second most notable part of Harrison's short tenure was the way he dealt with Henry Clay. Clay was the most dominant force in the Whig Party. He'd expected to essentially run the administration from behind the scenes. After all, Harrison had largely been elected on his war hero status rather than his political experience. To Clay, it only made sense that a man with his political savvy should be the real power in the White House. He tried to have his say in who received federal appointments. At one meeting when Clay was being especially insistent, Harrison simply told him, quote, "Mr. Clay, you forget that I am president." Later, Clay wrote to Harrison, insisting that Congress be called into a special session to address the economic state of the nation. Harrison wrote back effectively saying he wanted to hear from a variety of sources and then decide for himself whether a special session needed to be called. In the letter, he openly called Clay impetuous and said, quote, "I prefer for many reasons this mode of answering you, not to a conversation in the presence of others." Clay, in a state of fury, took this as a ban from the White House. Even before Harrison had taken office, there were signs that him and Clay wouldn't get along. Perhaps the most obvious sign was that Harrison had appointed Daniel Webster, Clay's main rival in the Whig Party, as his Secretary of State. Altogether, he seemed to heed Webster's advice more than Clay's, giving Webster an edge in the party power struggle. The decision to appoint Webster is notable in its own right. To this day, Webster is considered one of the most prominent men in the history of United States politics. After Harrison's death, he would stay on as John Tyler's Secretary of State and contribute significantly to the administration. It's a lot less likely that Tyler would have appointed Webster to this position on his own. However, during Harrison's short tenure, he did make it clear that even though he was more open to ideas from Webster than from Clay, he wasn't going to simply take orders from him either. At a cabinet meeting, Webster argued for the appointment of one of his friends as a territorial governor rather than the man Harrison wanted for the role. Harrison passed a handwritten note to Webster and asked him to read it aloud. It read, quote, "William Henry Harrison, President of the United States." Harrison then stood up and affirmed his decision. Harrison's other notable action as president was to call Congress into a special session. This is what Clay had requested. After deliberating, Harrison too agreed it was the right decision. This was on March 17th. Only a few days later, he fell ill. On either March 26th or 27th, he began to show signs of illness, and not long after, he called for a physician. He laid bedridden for the next week. He showed outward signs of recovery, but privately, he confided to a female attendant, quote, "I am ill, very ill, much more so than they think me." Later that day, at 6 o'clock, his physicians announced that he was beyond the point of recovery. He died 30 minutes after noon the following day. Harrison's short presidency is even an exception among other short presidential tenures. Presidents such as Warren G. Harding and John F. Kennedy were at least in office long enough that their presidencies can be evaluated. They had the chance to make decisions, deal with the consequences, and make new decisions in response. Even James A. Garfield had a chance to serve for well over 100 days before being incapacitated. Some speculate on what Harrison would have done had he lived longer, using his tenure in diplomacy, politics, and war as a reference. However, this is all speculation. And based on what he did do in office, there simply isn't much information for evaluating him as a president. To support this channel, consider subscribing or donating on Patreon via the link in the description below. You can also browse the channel for more videos like this on United States presidents, from George Washington to Donald Trump, discussing their careers, personal lives, and places in history.